Get one last drink. I don't know if I actually have water in here.
Oh my gosh, the old Stanley. Is that the old Stanley?
That's my old Stanley. I haven't
OG.
washed my Owalas in a long time, and the primordial soup is kind of scary. So I've switched back to my old Stanley until new bottles have been washed.
Primordial soup is so funny and so real.
So anyways, yeah, no, old Stanley's making an appearance.
All right.
Let's do this. Welcome to Tell Me About It, a podcast by SLPs for everybody. My name is Francie.
And my name is Maggie.
And today we're talking about a topic that we both love and has been on Maggie's mind a lot. We're talking about AAC.
AAC, woo!
Woo!
Yes, so AAC stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication. And we will get into what those two terms mean here in a second. But yes, it's been top of mind for me because I recently started working with, I've started working part-time at a preschool, and almost all of the kids on my caseload have some form of AAC. So I've kind of been plunged back into that world, and it's been top of mind for me recently. But Francie, you also have a lot of kids on your caseload that use AAC, right?
Yeah, no. So every school that I've been at has had some type of specialty program for kids who are complex communicators. And so I did AAC at our last school. I'm doing AAC at this school. I love AAC. It has a very special place in my heart. I am by no means an expert. I'm going to say this with love in my heart. I'm learning all the time. And so this is something that's ever evolving. And as technology evolves too, we get new AAC too. So you never, I don't know. I don't qualify myself as an expert, but I am passionate about it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I have told, for better or for worse, I've told prospective clients this too. I do not have a level of expertise in like feature matching kids with AAC devices or evaluating children for AAC. But I am familiar enough with enough systems that once, or like methods of AAC, that once a child kind of has one, and I'm happy to like, kind of informally trial things too as a therapist, especially different access methods and kind of lower tech, mid tech systems. Happy to do that. But yeah, so it's kind of more like once the child has their method, I can kind of then step in and begin to do therapy and the teaching kind of piece of that. But there are some SLPs that really specialize in evaluation and feature matching, and that is awesome and not an area that I am super well versed in. So
yeah, all of my students have had devices, and so I've never been a part of the process of getting them the device, because when they've arrived to me, or when I have arrived to them, I guess, they've already had a device. And so it's never been something that I've had to do. I know a bit about it, and I guess I am kind of going through this process right now where I'm trying to match somebody to a system that's probably a little bit better fit for them than the one that they have currently, because it was a gift, which is kind of an interesting situation. I digress. And so a little bit of experience with that, but I'm much like Maggie in the more, now that you've got a system, I'm going to help you learn how to use it kind of vibe. So
yeah. Okay, so let's jump in. Let's just define AAC. We already said it stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication, but what do we mean by those two words, alternative and augmentative? I think we both agree that the alternative piece is a little easier to define, and augmentative is where it gets a little bit slippery.
Yeah. No, I agree with that completely. I'm trying to find like a good definition for this, or whether I'm going to need to do this off the dome. I'm looking at Ash's website. Give me just a moment.
Yeah, you're fine. I think
Because I don't know if they have a better definition than I could give.
my explanation for alternative would be if a person is not using verbal speech as their primary mode of communication. The alternative is AAC. Like it encompasses all the alternatives to that, to verbal speech.
Then I guess augmentative would be maybe if we have lower intelligibility, we're using verbal speech, but we have lower intelligibility, and we're pairing our verbal speech with keyword signs or we're carrying it with gestures, that would kind of augment our communication a little bit.
I think that is absolutely an example of it. And part of me, like, as a way to explain AAC, wants to say, like, oh, we all use AAC, but we don't actually. Like, if you use verbal speech as your primary mode of communication, gestures, facial expressions, body language, that is part of your verbal speech communication. It's not really AAC because your primary method is still that verbal speech. But for a person that like either has unreliable or minimal verbal speech, those implementation of like gestures, signs, uh, written words and text, that kind of thing, or a speech output device like a high-tech device, that would kind of qualify as AAC because it is augmenting their communication.
Right. And I don't feel like AAC is one or the other. Oftentimes it's both alternative and augmentative together to get messages across. I oftentimes use total communication, like a total communication approach when working with students who are non-speaking, which means we're looking at every possible way that we could get a message across. We're looking at gestures, we're looking at vocalizations, we're looking at high tech, low tech, we're looking at whatever we need to get our messages across and kind of taking that holistic approach. And so, which is a combination of alternative and augmentative.
Yes, and that is such a good point. That total communication piece, I think, is really common too for kids that, and we're saying kids a lot because we're both pediatric therapists, but adults also use AAC, and we can talk about that more in a second. But yeah, for kids that are really impacted by their language disorder or any other co-occurring disabilities, we are using any reliable means necessary to access communication. So yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about kids, but Maggie kind of touched on it. Who uses AAC?
Yeah, I mean, broadly, anybody that does not have verbal speech as a reliable form of communication. So something that I don't think gets a lot of attention when talking about AAC is adults who have an acquired disability that used to use verbal speech 100% of the time to communicate and now use AAC to communicate. So this would be a person that maybe has a degenerative disease, something like Parkinson's or ALS, or a person that has maybe had a stroke or a brain injury, a brain tumor, cancer, that kind of thing that has impacted the language centers in the brain, making verbal speech less reliable for them. They may use forms of AAC, or even adults that lose their hearing in adulthood. Then they're using sign language. But if you have, there's levels to that. There's a difference between being a fluent ASL user who signs 100% of the time, and that is your form of communication, and then someone who maybe uses sign language as a supplement.
Yes. So. Small note here. ASL and keyword sign, two very different things. ASL has a whole grammar system, extra components to it that's cultural and important to the deaf community. Keyword sign is using some of the words within ASL, but in a non-grammatical context to help support communication for individuals who are non-speaking. So different, important, not the same.
That is such an important distinction. And yeah, like ASL is a language. American Sign Language is a whole language. So that would be like saying a bilingual child who uses a combination of English and Spanish with their family and friends is using AAC. They're not doing that. They're just and so that's kind of what, if somebody uses spoken English and also ASL, they are bilingual. That's what they're doing. But yeah, keyword sign. So this would be, we use keyword sign a ton with signed English signs, which are different than ASL, again, because they're not in that grammatical structure like American Sign Language. We use this all the time in therapy with especially beginning communicators, because sometimes those manual signs with your hands are a little bit easier to access than verbal speech. people do this a lot with even typically developing kids using baby signs for more, want, help, that kind of thing.
Which I
It's also not
understand.
AAC.
It's not AAC, and also with Love and Light, if you're teaching quote unquote baby sign, you're just teaching keyword sign. Like
Mhm.
we don't teach
Yeah.
when children are learning like the colors in Spanish and they're primarily English speakers, we don't call it baby Spanish. This is my own personal pet peeve coming out. This is
Ooh,
a total tangent.
okay. No, go for it.
Um, no, so we don't call it baby Spanish, we call it Spanish. And so if we're teaching signs to babies, it's just sign language. And so, but we're using it probably in more of a keyword sign context because we're only teaching one sign and not a whole beautiful sentence with the grammatical structures of a manual language. So, anyways, there's my tangent and kind of pet peeve of the day is people being like, oh, just do baby sign. What?
Such a good point. And I hadn't even thought of that before. Yeah, like if we teach preschoolers to count to 10 in English and to count to 10 in Spanish, we don't say we're teaching baby Spanish.
No.
And even though signed English is not a language in itself, it's different.
Yeah,
and
it's not a capital L language, like insofar that like
yeah,
it has
what
the
we're
culture
really
attached
doing
to
is
it.
teaching signed English vocabulary.
Yes. Mhm.
So yeah, that's an important distinction too. Very good. So yeah, who uses AAC? Anybody who needs it.
Lots of people. And this could be when, when we're looking or we're working with children, it can be kids with autism. It can be kids with Down syndrome. It can be kids who have a really severe phonological disorder and are very distressed by the fact that they're having trouble communicating. And so, or kids with apraxia, like it can be whomever would benefit from communicating in alternative means. So,
Yes. Who uses AAC? Anybody who needs to would be my like very simple response to that. But yeah, so you named a few different maybe diagnoses that would go along with use of AAC. So let's talk about maybe some different systems or methods that are out there, how to maybe select one of those or choose one, high tech versus low tech, access, all of these things. Because now that we've kind of defined what it is, we can really get into it on what
yeah.
AAC can actually look like.
I think starting with high tech versus low tech, and then with that kind of aided versus unaided is a good place to start because AAC can be anything. It can be unaided, which means that we are using gestures, and that's that pointing, the keyword signs, the vocalizations, the proximity, standing near something you want to indicate that you are interested in it. That is kind of unaided. It's everything that's on your person that you can use to help communicate in a non-speaking means. Aided would be the use of any other thing. So it's your body plus something else. And so with that, in that aided world, we can have low tech, mid tech, and high tech options, which is a whole plethora of things. And Maggie, you're taking a little like jaunt into low tech recently.
Yes. So this is probably going to be a tangent because, or not, maybe like a rant. I don't know. Because high tech AAC is awesome. And by that, I mean, this would be like, okay, so I think the easiest accessible pop culture reference for this is the device that Stephen Hawking used. That is a high tech AAC device. It was mounted to his wheelchair and it was a speech generating, like speech output device. Sometimes you'll see like a SGD, speech generating device. You'll see it shortened to that. Or you might be familiar with iPads that are in kind of like a special case that have a screen with all the buttons that people can press to put together sentences. That would also be a high-tech speech generating device.
Yep. High tech just means that it needs a charge to function, right? You have to plug it in at the end of the day.
Yep. And yeah, they're awesome. They have become more and more accessible as technology has advanced and become more and more accessible to normal people. And I mean like affordable, easier to get, that kind of thing. Back when this stuff was relatively new, it cost tens of thousands of dollars and was like huge and heavy and hard to carry around. Now you can get a refurbished iPad mini and put a AAC software on it for less than $1,000, which is really, really accessible for a lot of families, a lot more certainly than it used to be. So that's great. No hate to high tech AAC. Love her. But we also live in a world where kids have near constant access to screens as toys. So I think what I am seeing, and this is just in my practice, I'm seeing a lot of kids who need AAC get a high tech device and then basically just like be given the iPad with like little to no support or teaching that
And
goes
I
along.
think that's the important part is that,
Mhm.
like, they're just given it with the expectation that they will learn to use it independently,
Yes.
and that's not the case.
I think that part of this comes from kids are naturally kind of tech savvy. Like we have both seen children be able to navigate an iPad or a phone with alarming speed and accuracy to get to like their favorite YouTube video or whatever. Um, Kids are really like quote unquote tech savvy, but they're tech illiterate. And also most of the time they are actually illiterate, like they cannot read. So I've been saying in this just kind of like, I don't know, kind of like blunt way, like you can't just throw an iPad on a kid and expect them to use it.
There's a statistic that I heard at a conference a couple years ago that has kind of haunted me in the realm of AAC and our students who are non-speaking, in which the and I'm gonna butcher this, I'm gonna be so for real with you, so bear with me. The message of the statistic was that in order for a student who is non-speaking to get the same amount of language exposure that a typically developing infant would get in their first year of life, it would take the AAC user 84 years to get the same amount of exposure in AAC. And so we need to be modeling and teaching. And I think the frustration that Maggie is having is that that's not always happening sometimes when kids get high tech devices because I think of the saliency of iPads in today's culture, and so they're like, "Oh, they'll figure it out." We
Mhm.
have to teach, we have to teach.
Yes, that statistic is absolutely chilling. I hate it. I hate that that's a reality for so many AAC users. And yes, we have to teach kids how to use AAC, just like we have to teach kids how to use language. And like that's our whole job is teaching kids how to use language to communicate. And so, yes, my pet peeve has been just kind of throwing an iPad on a kid and expecting them to learn how to use it on their own. Because then what they learn to use it as is a toy. They learn to use it as a sound machine. They just like kind of hit buttons because they like the way that it sounds. They don't understand the communicative function behind it. And so, yeah, and we can get into this rant later with like maybe some like practical applications for what speech therapists can do to kind of solve this problem. But yeah, I definitely see that happen a lot and it's really unfortunate. So, I am becoming a bigger advocate for starting kids with low to mid tech AAC systems and going from there. And this does not mean like you can have a low tech system that is still robust, meaning that it has words for lots of different functions of language, functions of communication. So it's got requesting, commenting, wants and needs, social functions, like all kinds of things. But it's pictures on a piece of paper, which is cheap, easily accessible, and not durable, but easily replaceable. um, and it is a great way to start kids who are learning how to communicate without just handing them an iPad that then becomes like $1,000 paperweight. You know what I mean? So that's my
Yeah,
hot take on. I don't
and
know if it's hot, but
I don't know if it's hot. I'm very much in the camp that you should be using all types of AAC, like, not just one. We do so many things on a daily basis when we communicate that, like, sometimes you need different tools for different situations, right? And so I love a mid-tech situation, which are those things that have they do use electricity, but they're not necessarily high tech. They have batteries that you can replace. I'm thinking like a GoTalk 9 is kind of in my
Yeah.
brain right now. And low tech being things that require no electrical charge or things like that. I've found success with doing kind of lower tech stuff in like a bathroom and like having like communication, like words that you would need in the bathroom on a low tech situation in the bathroom. So like there's so many ways and contexts and things like that to use all types of AAC. So I'm very much in the situation of like communication all the time, always, and whatever means that needs to happen. So
Yeah. And I think something that I could picture being an argument maybe against this would be like, well, then if you have like a printed out and laminated PCS, which is picture communication symbols, not PEX, which is picture exchange communication system, different. But like
different.
if you have a printed out like PCS thing in like a bathroom stall that's laminated and stuck to the wall, and someone saying like, oh, well, then they can only say 4 things. Okay, first of all, 4 is better than 0. All right. And second of all, if they have a high-tech device that they don't know how to use, we're back at 0. So like having something up, I'm totally with you. Sorry, I'm trying not to sneeze. It is allergy season. I keep rubbing my nose. But yeah, anyway, it's all forms of communication all the time, and anything that can increase what they are able to do unaided, which for a lot of our kids is
Yeah.
pretty close to 0. They have like very few things they are able to communicate reliably across different caregivers, across contexts. So anything that we can do to increase that number is great.
Yeah. And topic boards are great. If you're going to do a very specific task and you want something that's low tech, doing something with like the most common words for that activity is great. And so when we think about all of these varieties and all these options for AAC for us, it can get very overwhelming. But I think working on a client by client, child by child basis will help to kind of figure out what somebody needs. Because on top of having all of these different technology options, we also have to consider the physical needs of the person that we're working with. And so if there's somebody who has a really complex body and maybe doesn't have a ton of control over their hands or tons of control in their maybe even their core. And so doing something that requires a lot of physical skill, something like a direct access device where you're directly touching the icons and things like that, might not be a great option for them. And so there's options out there for them as well with either eye gaze devices or partner assisted scanning or partner assisted auditory scanning, visual and auditory scanning.
Mhm.
There's
Or
tons
switch
and tons of
scanning too, where they
there's also switch scanning.
press
Oh my
one
gosh.
button repeatedly.
And it
Even
moves through different
Mhm.
options. Mhm.
Even proximity switches, which like they
Mhm.
don't even have to make physical contact with, but just kind of move their hand in the vicinity of, which obviously all of these things are specialized tools. They all cost money. But for our people with complex bodies, complex motor needs, this is a great way to go. And there's, yeah, one thing that I really love about AAC is that you get to be such a creative problem solver of like, all I need is one reliable movement that I know is intentional, repeatable, and controlled by the individual. That's all we need. We can go from there. Like it can be anything, you know? And so that's really great. It's a great way. There's so many choices for getting communication access for every individual, which is awesome.
Every individual, which is really awesome. There's also different softwares that meet different needs. And so we'll do a quick little dive into kind of some of the, I don't know if it's necessarily, I can't even think off the top of my head how many I can think of. Some of the most popular ones that I see in my daily life are lamp boards for life. And these are high tech systems. Well, actually, we'll go high tech, we'll go mid tech, and we'll go low tech because I got a couple.
Yeah, go
Um,
for it.
if my most common high tech devices that I am seeing, high tech softwares, devices are a little different.
Mhm.
My most common high tech softwares are lamp boards for life. I see touch chat quite a bit. And those are my main two. I don't really see as much Tobii Dynavox anymore because they switched subscription models. Don't love that. But
Yeah, this could be a whole tangent where we just rant about how unethical that is. But
Right. I see mostly those two. There's other systems out there like Proloquo
mhm.
and Snap Plus Core, and I'm trying to think of other like really kind of ubiquitous softwares that I've seen.
I think those are kind of the
Kind of
main
the big
ones.
ones.
There are some that are coming up. Cough Drop is an open
I know.
access one.
Hmm.
I don't see that used a whole lot by therapists trying to implement something with kids. I think it's kind of
Hmm.
more of like it's a really cool option, but I haven't seen it be used therapeutically yet. But that's just me.
Hmm.
And there are some that are kind of in that vein of like these open access. And by that, I mean like free to use. And the code, I believe, is also open access. So if you're really tech savvy and know what that means, you can like customize it and do stuff, which is really neat. Yeah, I think I would say those are the major players. I see a lot of LAMP, Words for Life. I see a lot of Snap Plus Core. I see less Touch Chat, which I think is unfortunate because
I
Touch
like
Chat
Touch
is
Chat.
really cool. Yeah. And Touch Chat also has, so Saltillo, which is the company that owns the Touch Chat software, Saltillo has free low-tech communication boards that are available for download on their website in English and Spanish that you can print out and put in a binder and have a durable, cheap, easily accessible, robust communication system on the go, which I love.
Woo! Which is great.
Yeah.
Mid-tex, I GoTalk is a brand that is kind of a
Mhm.
mid-tech situation. You're able to slip in a sheet of paper that has different icons and then record your own voice over different icons. And they've got tons of different settings. So you could have like 6 pages of 6 icons kind of situation. Interesting. An
Which I
option.
think is great.
Mhm.
Those suckers are also durable. Like
Oh, girl.
you can, if one of those gets hucked across the room, it's fine. It's like the flip phones of the early 2000s. Like you just pick it up, dust it off, it's good to go. Meanwhile, an iPad, sometimes if you look at it wrong, it decides to shut down and not charge or work anymore. Um, but yeah, I really like the GoTalk family, especially for beginning communicators. So I know that there is some, I don't know, it's not controversy. I would say like difference of opinion maybe on like how to start a kid with AAC or start a beginning communicator. And a lot of people fall into the camp of like start with as many icons as the kid can handle for sure. And so I think GoTalk has options where it's like maybe one button and then we have like a GoTalk 2 at the school I'm working at and it can go all the way up to what you were talking about where it's got like a frame of 9
They go even
interchangeable
bigger than that.
things.
They've
Yeah.
also got like a 12 and like maybe even
Yeah.
higher.
And if they have multiple like levels, you like flip a switch on the back that brings it to the next level and you would switch out the icons then that, you're multiplying how many words they have. So if they have like 12 or even higher, you could have up to 60 words on this one device that just is basically indestructible and takes batteries. So it's a great option honestly for beginning communicators.
Yeah, and just because next up would be low tech, and there's low tech could be core boards, low tech could be I'm trying to think of other just simple or PEX. PEX falls in this category.
Tech falls in this
Um,
category.
which this is PEX trademarked, the
Yeah, this is the
strategy.
Picture Exchange Communication System, PECS, PEX.
Mhm. But low tech does not necessarily mean not robust because pod falls in this. And if you've listened to
Oh,
us at all, you know that I love pod. Pod is a little bit more uncommon, and we can talk about it a little bit more probably later in
what does POD stand
future.
for?
Pod stands for Pragmatically Organized Dynamic Display, I think is the last one. And it is a low tech system that has a robust language system. So it's got all the things you would need to say multitudes of different things for a variety of different functions. And I find it to be a really great option that is oftentimes overlooked because it is a little bit more uncommon. And it's got multiple access types. So you could do direct access with touching. It's got the auditory scanning, it's got the visual scanning, it's got options for students who have CVI or low vision and need higher contrast, because that's another access. If we've got vision concerns, we need to look for icons that a person can actually see. And so I'm a big pod fan.
Mhm.
So, but it's low tech, and that's really great for people who maybe live a lifestyle that needs something that they want robust, but maybe they like camping. Great example. Maybe they like camping and they can't bring a charger for their device, so they want something low tech that doesn't need a charge. Or like I live in an area that has a lot of lakes, and so if the family's out on the boat, maybe bringing a $10,000 device on a boat, maybe that's not compatible with their lifestyle, but
Yeah.
they still want to be able to communicate autonomously. So Enterpod, big pod fan. So
Yeah. Yeah, another mid-tech one that we kind of skipped over is switches. So those like
mm,
Big Mac switches, Little Mac switches, and
those
uh,
you can get the voice record single message output buttons. I think Talking Bricks is
yes,
another brand, but
Talking Bricks is another one.
you can buy like a set of 4. Oh, I forgot to actually, that reminds me, I forgot to send a link to my process coordinator for these because I want to buy some. Um, You can find single icon or like these little message buttons on Amazon for like a set of 4 for like $20.
Yeah. Yeah, those can be really affordable. Again, great for beginning communicators, kids that are just kind of learning my words impact my environment. So, and also great for, like Francie was talking about earlier, having access in all areas. So if you have a switch that you keep, they're called switches. It's a button, is what it looks like. And so, if you have a switch that you keep in, like their bedroom to say like good night, good morning, that kind of thing. Like there are things that there are a number of uses for these. I really like, I have not actually worked with one of these, but I have so many ideas for a Big Mac step by step, which
Mm,
you cycle through a number of recorded messages. And I think those would be great for book reading. Those would be great for scripting if you have a kid that loves to script. If you've got a family member that wants to record like them saying special messages or something, it could be like, a great way for the kid to be able to interact with that. It could also be great for kids that have low mobility and can repeatedly hit a switch to scan through different options just in that button. But yeah,
we
mid-tech is great.
had Mid-tech is great. We've been using it a lot for like morning meeting stuff that has pretty rote
Mhm.
responses. Or like we do tuned into learning, which is like music-based social skill lessons situations, and some of those have pretty preset responses and actions and things like that. And so that's a great option where we use kind of that mid-tech situation where the messages don't change and it's topical for that situation. So,
Yeah, very cool.
mhm.
Yeah, there's a ton of AAC options. It's not just an iPad with software on it. It's not just um text or keyword sign or whatever. It can be a bajillion different things and any combination of those, which is really cool. Okay, AAC in its growing popularity has accumulated some myths that like to stick around and cause problems for us speech therapists. So we wanted to talk today too about some like common myths and kind of bust those a little bit. So one of the big ones that we hear, me and Francie have heard in our practice, is that AAC will discourage a child from speaking. This is not true.
Insert incredibly loud, incorrect buzzer noise. Like,
Yes.
like no. This is everything that the research has shown, and also in my clinical experience has shown the absolute opposite, and that it actually would increase verbal speech later. Because children have constant access to a language model, it helps to encourage all types of communication, but it does help to encourage verbal communication as well. Granted, verbal communication is may not be the end goal for all people. However, for those who that is the trajectory they get, AAC is a great way to constantly model that auditory language. So, big
Yeah.
fan.
Something too is that I think I got this phrase from you, Francie, but like communication is like water or electricity. It's going to find the path of least resistance. And in our world, the path of least resistance for the mainstream culture is verbal speech. So if kids don't have access to verbal speech, they will find the path of least resistance, which is an AAC device or a system that they have access to. But if they have the option to use verbal speech and the skills that verbal speech requires are starting to come online, they're getting that constant auditory model. They are learning more words and vocabulary. They're maybe working with a speech therapist on the motor aspect of speech as well. As those come online, they are going to start beginning to use verbal speech and relying on that more. It's more efficient. So yeah, that is just I understand why people think this. I get it. But it's just not true. It's simply not true. So yeah, AAC will not prevent a child from talking. Another big myth that we see is that people who use verbal speech don't need AAC. I feel like I see this from other professionals a lot.
I see this from
Yeah.
other professionals where they're like, "He's kinda, like, moderately speaking. What do you mean he needs an AAC system?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Why not? Why not?" We want our people we work with to say whatever they want to say, whenever they want to say it, and to whomever they want to say it to. And so if we have somebody who is kind of only sometimes using verbal speech as a communication method, why not supplement with AAC to help them in their communicative journey?
Yes. Yeah. And we've talked a lot, we've used the word robust a lot. Picture if you were a kid that could only say like 50 words. Is that robust? Like, do you do you feel like that's enough words for you? Or would you like some more? And so that augmentative piece of AAC, adding an AAC system to their inventory for communication is going to be so helpful, and it's going to help their education, their social relationships, et cetera, et cetera. Another myth we hear a lot, or I don't know if I hear this one so much, but I think this might just be kind of like when people think about AAC, they think about children. AAC is not only for kids.
No, I think it's most visible with kids, but when I was actually learning about AAC, I was in a course that was mostly geared towards adults because that was my professor's kind of like niche, was helping people who had had like verbal communication before and had some type of injury or condition that has prevented them from using that means of communication anymore. And so I came into the world of AAC through actually adult means. And so AAC is for everybody. AAC is for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like we kind of touched on this one at the beginning of the episode too. So yeah, that is really neat. I think my AAC course in school definitely did have an adult bent to it too, because the professor was an SLP at a hospital and so worked, and not a pediatric hospital, like a general hospital. So worked with all ages of people who use AAC. Okay, another one. This is kind of two. Sorry, I'm referring to a document we typed together, and this is kind of two myths, so I'm going to separate them. Another one that we hear is that a child is not ready for AAC. So
we kind of had an interesting discussion off mic about this. There are no prerequisites for AAC. However, there are some maybe skills that kids need to have to be more successful with AAC than others. Things like joint attention, things like cause and effect relationship. However, you can introduce AAC at any point in time and help to teach AAC alongside those skills. So,
yeah, I think the way that I phrased it is there are no prerequisites for exposure to AAC, but there are some skills that need to be on board before a person is reliably using AAC in a communicative way. So kind of like you mentioned, Francie, that joint attention piece, the understanding of cause and effect, understanding of those communicative functions of like, if I say this or like, hit this button, then I get X, or something in my environment changes and happens. those are prerequisite kind of cognitive pieces for a person to be using AAC reliably as communication. But we don't have to wait for those to come online before we are modeling, because part of the way that those skills are going to be built is by seeing other people do it in a way that's
Yes.
accessible for that person. So we
Yes.
shouldn't wait until they're quote unquote ready. We should be modeling and using AAC in front of
Along,
them.
yes,
Yeah,
and alongside that developmental path, right? We should be
absolutely.
doing it in tandem with.
Yes, it's all about, and this is like a huge concept in the therapy world, but that like zone of proximal development of like maybe they don't have this skill yet, but we're coming up on it, which means we are going to model, 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 teach, 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 and challenge that student until they achieve it. Um, so yes, this is just like why we talk to babies and toddlers before they're talking back to us. They got to learn
Language,
language somehow.
yeah, language acquisition doesn't occur in a vacuum. It occurs through listening to our environment and modeling in our environment. And the same is true for AAC. AAC does not get learned in a vacuum or in an absence of modeling. So get out there and model.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway. Um, with that subpoint B, which is what we just split up in the document, was AAC is a last resort. And I am in the opposite camp where I'm like, we should start here. We should start here and see where it goes. So I am never thinking of AAC as an inferior option to verbal communication, but rather just a different pathway entirely. And that's okay. And maybe those pathways will overlap one day, but it should, in my world and in my view, not be a last resort. It should be a first resort, because why not? Why not work on communication before we have verbal communication? Or if we ever acquire verbal communication, start with AAC.
Yeah, I agree. It's great to have the model. I think maybe it feels really intense, especially to a lot of caregivers, because it seems like this invasive kind of thing of like, oh, we're adding um, this assistive technology maybe really early on in the therapy process before
Yeah.
we've tried a bunch of other stuff. But like when you think about all of the things that we've already talked about, like communication is going to take the path of least resistance. There are no prerequisites to AAC, et cetera, et cetera. It makes sense to implement it really early for a kid that is having difficulty developing language.
Well, and I understand that it can be overwhelming for caregivers to have a child who has complex needs and then be handed one more thing. So I understand that. However, I promise that when you get into those habits of using these communication tools, it will make your life easier in the long run, because communication is so valuable, so valuable. And so it will help to kind of mitigate maybe some other hurdles later on if we have good communication habits early.
100% agree. All right. Last myth that we have that we want to bust is that eye gaze is easy. Eye gaze as an access method. I see this one thrown around a lot online for like a response to motor needs. So if a person has complex motor needs, which is usually when eye gaze is utilized, and sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself real quick. Eye gaze is when there is a camera or sensor that is trained to the user's eyeballs, like literally their irises, I think, and it like tracks where the user is looking on the screen, and so they can use their eye gaze to click on icons on their device. This is about as high tech as it gets.
It's so high tech and interesting. This is just Francie's fun fact for the day.
Yeah.
Hello. Eye gaze technology that was created by Tobii Dynavox is also used in like Mercedes-Benz and some like heads up technology in cars now. So like it's so advanced, and they use this a lot in like Formula One, I feel like too. I feel like I've heard that elsewhere. But
Interesting. Okay,
anyways,
cool.
the same kind of eye tracking technology is also used in like a bunch of other high-tech stuff, but it was created by Tobii Dynavox. Crazy.
Yeah,
It's tricky, guys.
really hard. Really hard.
And it's really hard. It takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of patience. It's worth it if you want to go down that path, but it's not as easy as like, oh, we'll just get them in eye gaze. Woo.
Yeah. And I will also say that unfortunately, eye gaze is not realistic for every individual that has complex motor needs. sometimes complex motor needs also affect eye movement. And so, and if there is a person with maybe cortical vision impairment where their vision is impaired in some way, or they have nystagmus, which is when the eyes involuntarily saccade, they move back and forth really quickly, eye gaze is maybe not going to be appropriate for them. So that is also something to consider. It's not kind of like a catch-all, a fix-it for a person with a complex body.
And that's why we have other access methods.
Yes. Yeah, eye gaze is really, really cool. But I mean, this is like, I feel like understandable with a simple like thought experiment of just like, think about if every time you wanted to say something, you had to intentionally and pointedly stare at a little square on a screen in front of you until it activated. What if you got distracted? What if your eyes get tired? What if it's really windy or bright out? What if like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Especially children that use eye gaze, I am in awe of, because
Truly.
the cognitive stamina and the just like muscular stamina that it takes to access communication in that way is so impressive. Like it should be an Olympic sport, honestly. I
Truly.
really believe. So yeah, eye gaze is not easy. It's amazing, but it's not like a magical fix-all. So yeah, those are our initial thoughts.
Yeah, initial thoughts. I think this is going to be a little bit of a series for us talking about different topics about AAC, and so which is really exciting for me because I love AAC.
Mhm.
So, first little stop is the little AAC 101 introductory to kind of what this is, why we do it. So,
Yes. Yeah, AAC is amazing. There's a lot to talk about with AAC. So yeah, I would say listeners, be on the lookout for our next few episodes to kind of be about this topic broadly speaking, because there's a lot to get into. As always, we are available on YouTube and Spotify at Tell Me About It in SLP Podcast. And you can also follow us on Instagram. It's a party over there at Tell Me About It SLP. We will see you next time. Goodbye.
bye.